Hey Josh, good morning for me and good morning to you as well.
Hey, good morning.
How you doing today?
Doing great. It's actually a sunny day in Seattle, I think, or maybe not. I'm in a basement at the moment.
It is for a little while longer. Like I mean, it's rare when I have someone who's in this essentially the same zip code that I am or same city, and yeah, we get about another half a day, and then the next 5 or 6 days are going to be some rough rain. But hey, we take it when we can
Oh,
get it, right?
yeah, seriously, half a day is pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. So that thankfully my office has a nice little window over the lake, so I can at least stare out appreciatively and look at
Oh,
the
nice.
weather.
Best view I have right
Um,
now is my fake background.
Nice. Hey, at least you could put yourself at a tropical location with that.
Yeah, I don't know if that one's built in.
The yeah, it's I know it does the custom ones, and I think it was just this last week that I was talking um and I'm completely spacing on his name, but he got a picture of every major like Microsoft location around the world
Nice.
office to use for his background, so he can switch around. But all of his backgrounds are actual Microsoft offices, so he can do one in Berlin and Amsterdam and so on and so forth, which
Yeah,
was
my
really cool.
my normal background is my actual desk. So when I'm at home, it still looks like I'm in the office.
There you
Not as
go.
creative. But,
Yeah, it's I think we had a chance to interact a little bit when we were both presenting at Fabcom, and it got the gears turning on wanting to get you on to go through again some of the stuff that you had talked about during the conference, and also just made me realize that I haven't had you on yet on the 120 streams that I've done so far.
uh,
So figured there was a good opportunity to finally get you on and get a chance to dive into some topics around the Fabric infrastructure with you.
yeah, I appreciate you extending the opportunity, and it was great talking to you at FabCon, and it's great talking to everyone. It was really fun to interact and finally see people. After this product's been released, this is our first really big conference.
And yeah, it went off like gangbusters, I think for sure. The I know there was like with any major conference the first time little bit of hiccups here and there. The date got moved and all that, but it sold out pretty quick. And I know with myself and Kurt Bueller, we presented to 740 people. Certainly a record for a
It
room
was
size that
amazing. I
I've ever
mean,
presented.
yeah, Jason
Go
and team
ahead.
did an amazing job pulling that together. I was worried, but first conferences are always a little tough. I remember back to our first Power BI conference, and
Yeah.
yeah, you're always worried, is anyone going to show? And people turned out like crazy for this one, and the whole thing went off without a hitch.
Well, and then having it in Vegas helps a little bit for sure, you know?
Helps and hurts. I mean, we got to fly, you got a budget, but
It's true.
yeah, people did it. They turned out.
Speaking of the fact that we both presented at Fabric, I think this also might be a good opportunity for those tuning in or watching later to give you a chance to introduce yourself, maybe give a little background about who you are and your involvement with Microsoft as well.
Sounds good. Yeah, so I'm Josh Caplan. I currently lead product management for OneLake at Microsoft. I've been at Microsoft now almost 16 years, and I've interacted probably with a lot of you in many different roles, many different jobs. I more recently, which is still about 10 years ago at this point, I had joined Power BI, really the analysis service team and Power Pivot team back in 2014, and got there kind of 6 months before we restarted Power BI for the second time. And when that whole transition happened, I ran all the developer experiences, all what we called content packs at the time, all the APIs, Power BI embedded. Then I kind of moved on to driving the Pro BI experiences. Azure Analysis Services took that service to launch. Ran the Pro BI experiences in Power BI, and then took over Power BI Premium as part of that. And then I actually moved on to Azure Synapse a couple of years ago, about a year before we decided to relaunch Synapse. So went through the whole process again, and that's how I took the OneLake pieces and took that from conception to where it is right now, along with the rest of Fabric during that time.
Curiously, excluding maybe the obvious answer of working with the new Fabric stuff, in your 16 years that you've been with Microsoft, has there been a particular product or project that you've worked on that for some reason was your favorite, and what might that reason be?
So it's a good question. What I love about what we did with Fabric is it parallels a lot of what we did with Power BI. And it was kind of fun seeing that the second time. And I think I was very skeptical when we relaunched Power BI, thinking, okay, well, this is not the way enterprises buy software. This is not the way you implement BI. We were really going extra self-service at the time, and still traditionally you were buying SQL Server and you're setting up analysis services and you're setting up reporting services, and IT was really leading that. And we were switching to the SaaS model in Power BI, which was very much the opposite. And a lot of skeptics going into that, customers and internally in the team. And once we started building and seeing really what the experiences were, we knew people were going to love it. And going through that whole process was a huge learning experience. Got to do it again with Synapse, basically, and Fabric. And this time I was on the other side. I'm like, no, I know this can work. And it was fun to see some of the comments around like, oh, well, yeah, this worked with Power BI, but Power BI was different, or is different. We respond saying, well, it wasn't different at the time. It's now considered very different because we changed the way people buy software at that point, with the way you sign up for a service like Power BI. And Synapse now, Fabric is going through that same transition. So it's been really fun to see that a second time. Both these projects have been, I would say, my favorites. It's really cutting edge and trying to be disruptive and innovative at the same time. It's almost like being in a startup inside of Microsoft. A very well-funded startup as part of comparing to some others, with a huge customer base to pull from, which is very unique. You have the chance to not only do something new, innovative, and disruptive, but also have immediate impact because you have that huge customer base to work with.
Well, you're going to have the early adopters who will hop on immediately. Yep. And then, like you said, the already existing customer base. But it seems like in general, there was, with each of the products, there was close attention that was being paid to perception and especially how you the acquisition of more of like the SaaS services with a lot of products. Thankfully, at least by the time Power BI came out, Office 365 had already been a thing for a while, so people were used to paying subscriptions for stuff rather than you buy a CD every 4 years.
Think back to 2014, it was not that clear. That was actually one of the reasons. So the first version of Power BI was very much embedded in Office. You got it through Office, which I can't remember what it was actually called at that time. But it was the BI sites in Office, basically in SharePoint. And one of the first things that we looked at when we started to redesign was, all right, how quickly could you sign up for this service? And we all sat in a room for an hour. I don't think a single one of us was successful in actually signing up.
Was it that
So
bad?
it was, yeah. I mean, it eventually ended up after about an hour of trying to get into a trial. You had to call an account, your account representative to actually get you to sign up and get the license on there. You had to somehow get signed up for SharePoint, and then you had to somehow get signed up for Power BI, and then you had to somehow get the two together. Um, yeah, it's come a long, Office itself has come a very long way since then, and they now have been kind of the poster child for what we did with Fabric. But back then it was okay. Well, these things like viral sign up, the 5 seconds of sign up don't really exist with inside Microsoft. So that was a huge focus when we launched Power BI. Was all right. Well, someone's got to be able to sign up in 5 seconds, and they got to find something. They got to find something that makes them say wow, makes them experience some value within 5 minutes. And both of
Five
those were
minutes to
very
wow,
tough
yeah.
tasks. Yeah. So it's 5 seconds, 5 by 5, 5 seconds to sign up, 5 minutes to wow.
Yep. Exactly. And I know, well, it's not 5 minutes, but that's one of the reasons a lot of those, I think many of the pre-cons that I've seen in the next year that's been scoped out, including, PAS and everything coming up, is the building a proof of concept in like an hour, or building it in a day, in Fabric. Those seem to be the really popular ones because it can show a client like what they can deploy to show some immediate ROI to hopefully then get the buy off to explore some of those new products.
And the 5 minutes is really about the person interacting, finding something that they can say, oh, I see the
Yeah.
value here. And they spend 5 more minutes, 10 more minutes, a day, a week, right? And they continue to go. Versus spending an hour in a room and giving up on trying to just even get the sign up to go. Yeah, like I said, these things have come a long way. In 2014, that was a huge, huge challenge. And Office and Power BI have come a long way in that time. And there's a big foundation from us to borrow from for Fabric there when we started that.
Well, it's considering the amount of products and platforms that already exist within the Microsoft stack, it seems like there's a fairly easy way to iterate. Where you innovate, but also with iteration, kind of at the same time, just because you can rebuild and reuse a lot of the building blocks you've already had.
Yeah, and there's pros and cons to that. I mean, starting fresh, it's you don't have baggage that you have to take with you, and you can really do things completely differently the way you want. But we have a very deep bench of functionality and features, and to redo all that would just be insane.
Yeah.
So we really had to strike the best balance there of taking what we have and still innovating and building fresh experiences on top of that, truly integrating what we did with analysis services and our data warehouse has been crazy, where we did the storage layers, made them work completely off of data in OneLake, or data in any lake at that point, so working directly off the Parquet files versus having their own internal storage and their own formats. That's completely changed the way you can interact with those two products. And Analysis Services is something that's been around for almost 30 years now. That's a massive leap forward, and you take all the value that Analysis Services brings you and extend it with this. So it's something you could not do if you were starting fresh. We have this very deep bench to pull from. And I think that's also something that carried us when we relaunched Power BI. We remember Power BI Desktop when it first came out. You couldn't even really do measures at that point. You couldn't change any formats, but you had this deep functionality that was built into the data modeling. You had these very strong data modeling pieces there, and that provided a ton of functionality in the beginning as the rest of the stuff really caught up.
It's in general with what I've found with that, and like a lot of other parallels with Microsoft products, is the engine, the thing behind the curtain might be incredibly complex, but the UI plays a little bit of catch up. So like you had the analysis services engine in Power BI, but I remember the pain of the first few models because you couldn't rename items for individual visuals. So if you needed page 2, you'd have to duplicate the column. Yeah, exactly. The amount of extra measures and calculated columns that you had with different names was ridiculous in the first versions of a few of those.
But we supported Power Pivot for Excel, so you could do all the modeling there, and you could upload it to Power BI.
Exactly. Most of my reporting was still done in Power Pivot for I think at least the first 12 to 18 months. And then eventually those few small things started getting added into Power BI Desktop. But Yeah, I mean, it took the
Mhm.
existing model and just gave it a new UI initially. And
Well, I think that was a huge lesson
yeah.
there too. It's how do you build these products incrementally, show value, get
Hmm.
customers, and expand from there. We had Power Pivot for Excel to fall back on, right? You could then take the time to build out a desktop that was right, and starting much simpler, and expanding from simplicity versus trying to take something that was going from the other direction and trying to simplify it back down. So learned a lot there, and a lot of those principles we reapply to Fabric. And Fabric, I think, is way ahead of where we were when we launched Power BI for the second time,
I would
which
agree on
is
that
how
one.
powerful it is and how complete it is. But just imagine where it'll be as we go forward. A lot of times customers will tell me, "We're surprised you didn't do this," and it's like, it's not that we didn't do it yet. Tomorrow's another day, and with these services, you'll keep seeing new stuff rolling out.
The and I think on the topic of Fabric, and also considering some of the evolution that we've talked about with analysis services, a few of the projects you work on, there was actually a question from Matthias that I think leads to potentially what we'll be talking about on Fabric. But let's talk about this and then transition to what we'll be getting into today. So he had a question on, like, considering Fabric and everything now, is what parts of, or any of SharePoint are might be getting replaced by Fabric solutions?
Um, that one I actually have not thought about. So SharePoint being replaced by Fabric.
Essentially, yeah. Or if you have thoughts on that.
Um, I mean, SharePoint. Yeah, I still think about that as for documents. OneDrive and SharePoint are for your documents, for business users. And what we've done in Fabric with OneLake has been really about data.
Hmm.
Now, there are some interesting parallels though, because data gets shared within SharePoint, not necessarily at the scale or the volume we talk about for OneLake, but there's very valuable data certainly in SharePoint, and for AI, a lot of unstructured data lives in SharePoint. A lot of business documents live in SharePoint. So one of the things we want to do is not necessarily replace SharePoint, but also have that collaboration where your SharePoint data is available within OneLake, similar to how we do shortcuts to other things, so that you can still have it all in one place. You can use it as data versus using it as documents. Um, and also SharePoint, have OneLake as a good home, and OneLake's already a good home for unstructured data as well. Um, but yeah, never thought of them as competing or replacing, but more of complementary, and uh, each of them covering different aspects of what you need to get through the day at that point.
I mean, in to a degree, they're. I mean, documents are just a different structure of data, essentially. At the end of the day, and like
Yep.
they're both data repositories, largely. But as you mentioned, the goal is not necessarily a replacement, but just easy access between either.
Yep.
Right? Like, if you're hosting your data in or outside of Microsoft, just hopefully centralized locations of it to be able to access for whatever needs you have.
Yep.
One quick suggestion from Adam as well for you is he hopes that you can make SharePoint lists a little bit faster from a data perspective.
Well, I'll add that to the list. Not the
Exactly.
SharePoint list, but the to-do list.
And but with that, and also I think talking about like OneDrive itself for documents, and like the fact that the slogan even for OneLake is essentially like a OneDrive for data. Do you think that's a good opportunity to maybe transition into the topic of the day?
Sure. Yeah.
I can flip
So
over to your screen if you're ready.
sure. Yeah, we do. We have tried to draw a lot of parallels between Fabric and Office, and that was kind of our guiding principles. Like, how can we do more with data, or do with data how you interact with Office, how you interact with files, documents, and you've seen the metaphor between Office and Fabric used a lot, and that was intentional. And we always kind of wanted to see how far we could go with that metaphor, and we found we can go pretty far. And for OneLake specifically, I love drawing this parallel because I think it really fits well. As I just mentioned, OneDrive being for documents, you have to kind of think back before we had OneDrive, before you had SharePoint, before Dropbox was here, and how do we actually share files? Besides emailing them, which was my most common way, you had your network file shares. And what is it? What is a network file share? You go out and you would buy servers, you'd rack them, you would set up folders on there, and you essentially use the storage system and the folder system to share files. That's something that works. Usually, every time I showed up, my network shares were going, and I always have to re-add them. But generally, it worked. But it's a storage-based system that you had to basically build yourself. Dropbox, OneDrive, SharePoint, that all comes along, and they give you essentially a SaaS service that shares files, stores files, shares files. And that's how it starts, but it becomes much more than that over time. It becomes collaboration over files, it becomes governance of files, and continues to evolve. So I do think data lakes are very much in that same boat right now.
And my one hope is that as that stuff comes in, because I've seen horrible OneDrive things where with lots of versions of files and other stuff. So it's you have the world is your oyster scenario with OneLake, but proper structure definitely will go a long way for anybody that starts to use it versus just dumping everything in there.
Yeah, and proper structure definitely goes a long way. And when you look at other data lake solutions, you're looking at really storage. You're buying storage, you're buying drives, and it's up to you to implement that pattern, right? So you end up with a lot of that bad structure. There's no guidance whatsoever on that structure, and you end up with these silos, right? You end up with lots of different storage systems out there. You run up different business domains running their own lakes, and some of that's technical, but a lot of that is just people problems, right? It's really hard to collaborate. It's really hard for everyone to follow the same standards. And not that it's just hard, but it's just easier to do your own thing. That comes with a lot of tax, resources you have to manage, but it definitely makes velocity for your own project easier. But it creates these silos, and then you have to start breaking down silos by copying data, moving it across, trying to consolidate things together. And the thing with the storage systems is not many applications actually work directly with them. They're not capable enough to really power most end users or most applications. So you build serving layers on top of it, which are like data marts, cubes, warehouses. And these aren't referencing the data. These are copies of the data or copies of the copies in a lot of cases of the data. And you're trying to trace back to the original source. Where did this number come from? Why is it not matching this other report that claims to have the same number? And maybe it's coming from a copy of data that's not up to date. These are things you're building to manage and managing yourself. And there's just a lot of cost with this. But there's value when you get it done, but it's work. So this is the old model. And we think, so we were thinking to ourselves, how do you make this into a SaaS service? So going back to that OneDrive model, give this as a service instead. So you go back to that structure. Well, we try to give you some of that structure by default. So how do we eliminate people from creating silos? Well, you can't have more than one OneLake, just like you can't have more than one OneDrive. And it's in the name, so we can't really change that. Every tenant you'll have exactly one OneLake. And as a SaaS service, we also know where your company begins, where your company ends, right? Because we have this concept of a tenant. So we can say that any data within your organization lands within your organization's OneLake. And we can say that OneLake is governed by default. So you kind of mentioned, how do you stop multiple versions of people from doing bad structures? Well, one thing you can do here though is avoid data going other places, right? If we make it really easy for you to land your data in OneLake, it lands in OneLake. If we set up the basic structures by default, it's going to land within those basic structures. If you have governance, an admin who's setting things up, you know that any data that lands in OneLake is automatically governed and secured. Then you can get to the task of making sure, it's useful, it's usable, it's discoverable. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But I mentioned we have that admin. We don't want that admin to be a gatekeeper. So think again like Office or SharePoint, where you can create your own Teams channels or your own SharePoint sites. You don't need to go through an admin to do that. That's why we have workspaces. Workspaces let you do let different teams collaborate and work independently. but they all still contribute to the same lake. So if it's easy to get your data in OneLake, how do we avoid kind of what you mentioned there? I think the lake term would be data swamps, right?
Yeah.
So how do you just avoid getting all that data into OneLake and just having it be useless, or having it be worse than useless, confusing? You have uncertified data next to certified data, some random thing someone uploaded sitting next to data that IT produced. Well, you start to bring some clarity to Lake. So you want everything in here so it's governed and secured. But we have a few other concepts we've added. We've taken the data mesh concept. It's a pattern. And it's another example of a pattern people do with data lakes. But we take a pattern and try to make it into a product. That's what a SaaS service does. It doesn't mean you have to go implement a pattern. Those patterns start to become a product and they guide you into that implementation. So we've taken the concept of domains from data mesh, and now we let you group workspaces into domains. This gives you another boundary in between the tenant and the workspace. Now, as part of that, you can have different governance policies, different controls at the workspace, but also you can certify data. Each domain can say, this is our official data for this domain. And then you can see, because it's been certified, you can see what is the official data versus what is not. And really, that's the data that should get used. Well, let's say for some reason it doesn't. And there are a lot of reasons that the official IT data or the official certified data doesn't get used, because and a lot of them times it's good reasons, but whatever those reasons are, you can see that usage, you can see what's happening there, you can start to take action on that. Maybe that data needs to become certified. Maybe that data needs to move into IT, or there's probably some missing use case there, and you need to give people the ability to iterate and serve themselves, but you want them to do that in a governed and controlled way. And this is what we start to enable here. Let me pause there for a second.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as you said, there, to a degree, like the more freedom provided, the more that governance, security, and any type of a pipeline or process becomes important as well. Let me double check to see if there. Oh, and I think there actually might be one. Go ahead.
Yeah, the freedom's a really good point. People got to do their jobs, right? So if you stop them from doing something, let's say in OneLake or in Fabric, they have to find another way of doing it. So they're going to find their freedom. It might be more work for them. It might be, but also it creates silos and also blind spots to your governance, to your control, and makes it harder to integrate later. So we understand they need freedom. We understand there's self-service out there. We want to make sure we can facilitate all that in the same place in a governed and controlled way.
Let me bring up one quick question that we had from Fernando as well that's just on the topic of OneLake. So Fernando's asking that OneLake essentially is to not duplicate data. That's the goal of it. What's a best practice to like let users know what data is already available? And that can either be answered now, or if that's something you have that will be talked about later on, we can bring it up then as well.
Yeah, we'll touch on it a little bit later, but let's talk about it. Actually, let me. So you're referring to kind of our one copy principle, and there are a lot of reasons to copy data. Some of them good. Some of them is not necessarily about copying data; it's more about restructuring data into a more usable form or combining it with other things. But there are a lot of ways to copy. There's a lot of reasons to copy data right now that are just about using it with different engines. So one of the big things we did was make sure that the engines that we have in Fabric, of which we have many, all work with OneLake and all write their data into OneLake and write it in the same formats. So all of our engines right now make their data available in OneLake and Delta Lake format. And because they all write it in the same format, they're all able to read it in the same format. Because they can read it in the same format, they can do this without duplicating the data, without copying it. So I can have the same piece of data. I can use it with Power BI in direct lake mode. I can use it with our SQL endpoint, or I can use it with Spark. I can use it with Data Factory, and I'm not making duplications for that reason anymore. So there's a lot less reasons to now duplicate your data and work with it directly, and you get to choose the right engine for the right job. This also means that how you want to produce the data could be separated from how you want to consume the data. So if you have a team who prefers to work with Spark, or you have a team who prefers to work with stored procs in a SQL warehouse, they can use their tools of choice to build the lake in this case, and it doesn't create silos anymore. Data can still be consumed across all these engines the same way. So that's one of the ways we're removing duplication. There's a few others. We'll talk about shortcuts in a second, but more specifically to that question, how do you let users know that data is already there? So we have the OneLake Data Hub now, which is the way we our catalog that's built into the Fabric, and that's one way now to start to discover data. And that's going to keep expanding. We're going to keep building that out. But the fact that we have this huge repository of data and it's all in one place, making it more known, making it more available, are things that we, in some cases, already have, and things that we'll be expanding as we go along. But we have a ton of possibilities now because we have this huge repository in one place.
And in general, the thing that I actually like, and I would say almost even pops back out of the analysis services diagram, is the thing that they were talking quite a bit about at the FabricCon, which is the semantic link, which even further helps for less data movement and more ingested into the analysis service layer, but also like easy access to it anywhere. You can go back into Spark, T-SQL, all this other stuff. So it's one of the most exciting things that I personally am looking forward to seeing all the scripts and notebook copy paste codes that are going to automate a bunch of stuff off of that.
Yeah, I definitely love that one. I also love seeing analysis services on our charts, on our slides again too. There's so much behind the scenes for Power BI, and now it's front and center again. But the fact that we have this one copy of data just means that more of the concepts that within these engines can start to come across in other experiences. So yeah, semantic link's a great example of that, of reusing the semantic model within notebooks. Within notebooks, within reports, those also become great ways to discover data and share data across the organization. The more you can reuse, the less copies that will just happen naturally. And the more valuable those reports are, the more people who will use them, and the less people have to go out and build their own things. So this kind of all naturally feeds into itself. And one of the concepts we talk about now is like data value. How much value do you get out of a single piece of data, a single copy of data? And there's one thing I'm looking at tracking right now. For every gig that gets inserted in OneLake, how much can it be used? How much is it being used across these different engines? And that, to me, speaks to the value of that data. Traditionally, prior to OneLake, every copy was its own silo, and the value of that data could only be within that silo. Now, any piece of data you write can be used in so many different ways, and you can get so much more value out of it.
Exactly. And I was just quickly answering a question on something related to SharePoint, but the context that I think you brought up is really good on the consolidation of movement and just the integration, especially with a lot of this stuff. But I know we jumped ahead a little bit, so I think the question was well answered. I just want to make sure to give you opportunity if there was anything that we skipped over as we kind of jump forward a couple slides.
No, it's fine. I'm happy to keep it to slides, or we can keep it conversational as we go through. So I don't mind jumping around.
People have really liked this so far, the slides so far, as we've been having these conversations. So yeah, anything else that you have around those, because a lot of, like, I certainly am a huge visual learner, so the diagrams, flowcharts, and everything else really help me visualize the especially the movement, because the whole concept on OneLake is movement reduction. So those are also very helpful.
Let me show a couple more, and we can actually look at some demos.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So everything I mentioned here too is also true for engines outside of Fabric, not just within. So we built OneLake on top of AWS Gen 2 storage, but one thing I also want to make sure is OneLake is not AWS Gen 2. It's a service on top of it, just like OneDrive is a service on top of Blob. But we try to bring the best of AWS to the surface as well. It's not something we try to hide. We try to hide the management of the resources, but the functionality, the things people people love about ADLS, we try to bring to the surface as well. So the same ADLS Gen 2 APIs and SDKs are available on top of OneLake. And you can actually address your OneLake as if it was one giant ADLS Gen 2 storage account. Instead of putting in the storage account name, you only have one storage account for your OneLake, and it's just OneLake. And then the container names are actually your workspace names. And then you have your items, which are like a lake house, a warehouse, a semantic model. It's just going the path to the data. So anything that's compatible with ADLS Gen 2 can read and write to OneLake. So Databricks, Azure HDI, Azure AI Studio, which is relatively new. All these work directly with OneLake and can work directly with the same files without duplicating the data. Let me actually show this real quick.
Oh, please.
So this is Fabric. Here's my list of workspaces. Like I said, creating workspaces is very lightweight. It's really just a few clicks. But I'll pick an existing one here. And you'll see I have one data item in here. It happens to be a data warehouse. And going into the data warehouse, you'll see I have a schema and a single table with some data in it. All right, so this looks like a SQL data warehouse, right? I can run SQL queries here. It feels like a much more modern version of SSMS here. But it's meant to feel like SQL. That's why we have different data items, because they give you different experiences or different personas. It's meant to be what you're used to using when you're using that type of product. So I'm used to using data warehouse. This should feel like a data warehouse. Now, it is storing its data in OneLake. And we can see it by looking at the files themselves. And you can see the files in many ways. If you're used to using Azure Storage Explorer, you can connect that to OneLake because we, again, support the same APIs. But we also have a file explorer that's built into Windows that's similar to OneDrive. And we can see the same files there. So pull that up. I see that same list of workspaces, but this time they're folders. Going into that workspace, we see our data warehouse data item. And we see, there's going to be a tables folder. And in that tables folder, we see the schema. We see the table. And then I can create a new table by just doing T-SQL. So I'll do a create statement here. I'll insert just one row of data. You'll see it show up in the UI. When I come back to Windows, I'll refresh the screen here. I see the table pop up here. Going into it, I see now it's stored in Delta Lake. So there's a Parquet file there. There's a Delta log there. So even though I created a table with T-SQL, even though I inserted some rows with T-SQL, it wrote back to OneLake in Delta Lake format. So if you know how to use T-SQL, or you work with an application that knows how to work with T-SQL, you can already work with OneLake. You can already write to OneLake in open file formats just by knowing SQL. And you can also read from OneLake just by knowing SQL. And this is true for any of our engines. And with analysis services now, I can build an analysis services model. I can turn on the OneLake option for that, and that data will be in OneLake in Delta Lake format.
Yep.
So really, everything starts to lead to OneLake here. You don't have to know how to work with data lakes to do this. And everything's going to be stored in open file formats. For the warehouse here, there's no other location that this data is stored. So it is natively within OneLake. So there are other ways to load data, many other ways. I'm not going to show them all, but I'll show a couple simple ones. So data warehouse, very good. With structured data, very SQL-like. Let's create a lake house. I say the lake house is always our most lake-like item. And what I mean by that is it mimics what you can do in containers in ADLS Gen 2, but it also supports structured data. So you'll see when you go into it, you have the table section, you have the file section. The table section is meant to be your more structured data, but the file section, you can put anything, just like a storage container in ADLS Gen 2. And when I say anything, I literally mean anything. This is a data lake. This is not a relational system here. Not just a relational system. It has those components, but it also has the fully unstructured components of a data lake. So I can just take pictures if I want to. I'll take pictures from Windows, sitting on my desktop. You can get more instruction than that, but that's pretty unstructured. I'll load those directly in just to this folder in the file section, and instantly it'll be there.
Is that just you with wearing sunglasses in that folder? Or? Oh, it's just a
No,
picture of sunglasses.
yeah, picture of sunglasses, product photos,
Okay.
also stock images that we're allowed to show. Yeah, but any file type can go into OneLake. It doesn't have to be Delta Lake. It doesn't have to be a table. It could be any file type. Now we do something special with tables. If it is in Delta Lake format, we do some special things with it. And one thing that's different from the Lakehouse and the warehouse is the Lakehouse lets you load data any way you want. And let's say I have a team who's doing data engineering in Databricks and using notebooks to structure and load their data. They can write that data natively to OneLake too. So I'll write to the table section this time. And I can start by just grabbing the path to the table section. So if I go to the properties pane here, you'll see the ABFS path here. This is the path you would use for ADLS, but it's to my location in OneLake this time. And we'll flip over to Databricks. And Databricks, you'll see the notebook here. It's reading from an ADLS Gen 2 storage account. It's doing some transformations, and it's writing back to a different storage account. I'm just going to change that output storage account location to my OneLake path. And you'll see in the path the workspace name and the data item name. And then it's going to write several tables here. I'll run it. You can see when it's writing those tables, it's actually writing them in Delta Lake format. And because it's writing it in Delta Lake format, we do some special things here. When I come back to the Lakehouse, I don't just see files. We automatically recognize these as tables, and we show you the tables. We load them as tables. And they're immediately available to be used in any engine. I can start building Power BI reports directly on top of this. I can start running, building Spark notebooks on here. I can run SQL queries against this. I can connect Databricks back to this and read it as well, too. It's available to all engines as if it were a table already.
The fact that it gets into it that easily is one of the 5 minutes to wow factors. I think is where a lot of this stuff is. The nuances of the structure and intricacies of the design to finish it definitely takes some time and consideration, but just getting data in is fairly effortless.
Yeah, and I'm showing you a bunch of things here I don't necessarily want you to have to think about, right? Pulling back the curtain a little, but it should just seem like these things just work. And we're talking a little bit about the how here. The how is very important. But the main thing to know here is that it'll work. It'll work across all these engines. You're not building these data silos, and you focus on the data and you focus on how you're going to use it separately. The tools you need to use it, you can focus on separately.
And just speaking of a little bit of pulling back the curtain, the session that I did with Bogdan a couple weeks ago on the thing that makes the warehouse specifically very magical is something that I'm dropping into the chat for people if they're interested. But that was one of my favorite deep dive sessions because there's a lot of really cool stuff and like kind of 3 products that never existed at the same time together, all that came together for that for the data warehouse and Fabric, which is why it's such a unique item now in Microsoft.
Yeah, it's an amazing journey, and it really speaks to the commitment here to be like centric and open. I mean, we took products that have evolved out of other products over a long period of time, and we've reworked them to be focused on the lake, to now rely on these open formats, where a lot of times similar products will do a much more closed system because you have a lot more control. You have control over how everything is exactly stored. You can optimize it for your exact needs. We have to give up a lot of that here, but still the expectations are the same. The performance is the same. The quality is the same. So it's been a fun balance there to make this happen, but we've really shown, hopefully we've really shown here the commitment to being open and using and relying on these open formats.
Absolutely.
So I mentioned shortcuts earlier. That is another major feature of OneLake and another way that we reduce duplication of data. And shortcuts you can think of like shortcuts on your desktop. They're just pointers. Really, it's just metadata. It points from one location to another. And this really started out with OneLake shortcuts. We were trying to figure out, the first use case was where we have data in a warehouse and we want to use it in a lakehouse. How do we do it without duplicating the data? And traditionally, you would duplicate the data. You would export it from the warehouse, put it in some lake storage, and then you could use it with Spark in a conceptual lakehouse. Fabric, we don't make you do that. In fact, yeah, if you're using a lake house, you can actually just reference the data directly in that warehouse without doing anything. But if you want to actually have it show up as if you had copied it into that lake house, you want to merge it with other data, you want to make it discoverable and easier to use by other users, as just as easy as if you had copied it, you can create a shortcut. A shortcut, again, just like in Windows, it points to that other location and looks like the data will be physically there. And I can shortcut data in OneLake within the same workspace. I can shortcut across workspaces. This is how, if you're following that data mesh pattern, you can start drawing the lines between your domains by shortcutting things between workspaces. And the data will appear in those locations as if they were physically there. But you don't change the ownership of the data. You don't change who can use the data. And when we first released, we released with the OneLake shortcuts, but then we thought about, well, what about data that's not OneLake? Literally, when we first released, no data was in OneLake because it was brand new. So any other open storage system out there, we wanted to be able to incorporate. So when we launched with shortcuts to AWS Gen 2. We launched with shortcuts to Amazon S3. We very quickly launched shortcuts to Dataverse within Microsoft. So all your business applications data, all your Microsoft data is available through shortcuts in OneLake. And then we just announced an expansion. We released Google Cloud Storage and Amazon S3 compatible sources at FabCon. Those are currently available in public preview. And we also announced that, but haven't released yet, it's in private preview right now, the ability to use the on-premises data gateway to shortcut to on-prem sources.
Oh, I missed that part. Okay, so you can, even with on-prem data, you could still create a shortcut for that. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, so it starts with so you can use the gateway now to get to your on-prem sources. The only protocol we support at the moment, which turns out to be the most popular one, is S3 compatible. That opens up to dozens and dozens of sources right now. Let me see if I actually left that slide in here. Of course I did not. No, I took it out. But yeah, almost every source on the Gartner Magic Quadrant for object stores supports S3. It's become the de facto standard, so that opens up to a lot. And then we'll continue to add more and more protocols here to get to more and more data. But the on-prem one opens up a lot of possibilities.
I have a question on shortcuts, actually, from Donald, which I think is a good one. So Donald's asking, do S3 shortcuts include image files?
Absolutely. You can shortcut you shortcut to folders, basically, or directories, or in S3's case, buckets. Whatever's in there is in there. It's by reference. It shows up. Now, we don't do any special handling for images. So when you come over to OneLake, you'll see them as images. And you can run Spark on top of it. You can train an ML model on top of that. They're not automatically recognized as tables because they're images at the moment. But you can shortcut to anything.
That's perfect.
And I can actually show, do you have any questions pending at the moment? Or I can also show a demo of this real quick.
Actually, I have one more. And just as a reminder for people tuning in, start it with a Q because it helps me to spot it in the chat. But it looks like Alan actually had a question. So let me pop this up. Here we are. So what can we have? When can we have a shortcut of a view that resides in Fabric?
Views are a little trickier.
Yeah, okay, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, views are a little trickier. We have some ideas how to handle this, but the reason views are trickier is because they're not materialized. I mean, there are materialized views; those are less tricky. But let's talk about the unmaterialized ones at the moment. A view is typically logical, and the logic of that view resides in the logic of that engine. And Spark, the languages of Spark are very different than the languages of T-SQL, which are very different than what Analysis Services knows, and very different than what, let's say, other engines outside of Fabric, if you take Databricks or Snowflake. There's not a lot of common understanding across those. So the logic for that is really locked into those engines at the moment. So if you have similar engines, that logic could be shared a little bit more. But when you start to open up the breadth to the different types of engines that we have here, sharing that logic becomes a little bit harder. We have some ideas of how we're going to handle this, and some things maybe coming down the pipe here But at the moment, yeah, views are something right now that would be specific to the engine you use.
Okay, yeah, that and there's further performance considerations that you have to probably look at, as you said, because a lot of views are considered logical and somewhat more lock and key, uh, whatever they're doing within that system.
And now you can use them across the engines, but the way they work is a little bit different. It's not going to work. So if Power BI, you're going to use a view, it's not going to work in direct lake mode. It's going to go connect to that SQL endpoint and run it through the SQL endpoint. So you're going to use the SQL compute there to make it happen. So yes, like you said, the performance considerations are going to be different for the view, which is not being read directly into memory. Is going to have to run from the SQL, run and compile from a SQL side before you can see those results. And similarly with Spark, you can connect Spark to the SQL, and but you're going through that other engine to get the engine specific logic at that point.
It reminds me of a topical conversation that I just had earlier this week with a client specifically on views, because they were asking on like best practices and like how many nested views can you have? Like we have some views that are like 7 or 8 deep. Like you probably don't want to have a view referencing a view referencing a view reference. It's like, is it slow? Yes, that's there's a good reason for that at that point.
Well, there's a wide range of uses for views too there,
Yeah.
and some of them are just pretty basic, which is, okay, I want to have an indirection over my table, so I'm basically going to put a select star on top of it. Or I'm going to use it for security. Now,
Yeah.
and the third one is I want to also put some business logic in there. That one's a little harder. So that one is definitely a strong use case for the views. The other two have kind of evolved over time, and I wonder how long those patterns still will be relevant if there's other better ways of doing that indirection and that security. So we want to give you that same level of security basically in the lake itself, which is something we've talked about on our roadmap that start to show some pieces of that rolling out. The indirection, there's other tricks for that too. If we can start to solve these problems in other ways, and the business logic becomes the last piece, and there's lots of ways to do business logic already and share that, especially through the semantic models. And some new patterns I think will start to emerge here that will be more efficient, be able to work directly off the data in storage and be able to provide you better performance at better cost.
There's one other follow-up question that I had from Guillermo that I think is actually pretty good. So, are there any near changes on the amount of data retention policies of deleted elements in OneLake?
So we have a data retention policy. So okay, there's a couple of retention policies in Fabric as a whole. There's deleted workspaces, which is 7 days right now, I believe. Then there's actual deletions of files within OneLake, and we did just announce that you can use the ADLS APIs to restore files that you've deleted.
Okay.
The one thing that's missing right now is your ability to control the retention policy length. We set it right now. I think we had initially set it at 28 days. We're actually trying to pull that back to 7 days. So depending on when you create your workspace, it'll be 7 or 28, and we're turning it down a little bit just to match it with the default of ADLS and the default of the workspace. The other major changes you'll probably see there will just be, we'll give you the ability to control that retention policy. So you can decide if you want longer than 7. The retention policy on OneLake just is really an extra protection in case of accidental deletions, things you need to go back and recover. And I want that to be configurable and controllable by you to determine how much protection you want there.
Okay, excellent. So it sounds like there will be additional user configurable windows that will be provided down the line.
Yep.
Perfect. Excellent. I think that was everything in the chat for as far as questions that go.
Show a quick demo of shortcuts. Oh, yeah, you talked about that. So here's that same warehouse we had in the first demo. It had that sales table that we created, and it had just one row of data. For demo purposes, I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to talk about just small numbers of data, small volumes of data, but try this as much volume as you want. This stuff is meant for scale. So let's say I'm in one business domain, I'm in the sales domain, and we have a data engineer who's working in a lake house, and they're in the marketing domain, and they want to incorporate this data as part of their data product. yeah, like I said, in the past, they'd have to basically extract this and put this into a lake house or another warehouse for them to combine it with their data. But now they can do this with shortcuts. If I flip over to that other developer who's working in the marketing domain, they can go and create a new shortcut. And this brings up all the sources. This is a little older video, so you don't see all the sources at the moment. But they can go to OneLake, and this brings up the OneLake Data Hub. And the OneLake Data Hub will show them all the data that they have access to, or all the data that they have access to, request access to. And they can even filter this down to the sales domain. And here you see the data that's in the sales domain, but also the certified data in the sales domain. So what does the sales domain officially recommend or officially certify? And here we see that same warehouse that we built earlier. And we'll see that same table that we built earlier. And I'll just create the shortcut here. Shortcuts, files to files, right? Create. And within seconds it's created and the data is available to be used. It appears here like we actually copied the data in. And we see that same one row of data, but no data movements actually occurred here. It's just all by reference. It looks like it's here. It's just like a shortcut again in Windows. It feels like it's there, works like it's there, but the data is still in the original location. The data is still owned by the original location. And I can combine this with other data. So not all the data I need here is in OneLake or even in Azure. The customer data might be sitting in an S3 bucket. So let's go over to S3. I can see I have customer data here. Go into that. I can see it's actually in Delta Lake format. It was probably written by Databricks. I can grab the path to this S3 bucket and make it available within OneLake. So I'll create a new shortcut, but this time I'll choose S3. One thing that's not shown in this demo, because I recorded a little while ago, is the UI has changed for this. It's the same graphical UI that you have now in OneLake that I showed in the previous part is now available for all sources. So you can do this all graphically now. You can browse the lake here, and you don't have to specify these paths manually anymore. But I'll specify the path here, and I'll put the name of the shortcut on. And within seconds, again, now the customer table shows up here. No data migration from S3 from AWS has happened here from Azure. To Azure. I mean, it's all the data still resides in S3. And one thing I love about shortcuts that's I think pretty unique about the solution we did here is that this is really a storage level concept. It's very low in the data stack here, right? So low that all the different engines, whether they're Fabric engines or anything else that goes and talks to OneLake, doesn't even know their shortcuts. And that's caused some interesting challenges of UI and how we show things there, because you literally don't know that they are shortcuts. But the benefits there is that everything on top of them just works. There's no difference in features and functionality because these are shortcuts. So I can flip over here to the SQL endpoint. And I can see the two tables in the SQL endpoint. And I can build a new T-SQL query on top of this. And I can join those two tables together, joining across clouds. This is the point everyone always asks me about performance. They said this is very low in the stack, so most of the performance optimizations that the engines do kick in above this, actually.
Nice,
so
okay.
Performance really comes down to physics at this point. If you're doing a shortcut to say 80 or less, and you're in the same region, it's no different than a OneLake shortcut at that point. It's actually no different than data in OneLake at that point. It's all in the same data center. It's all very quick. If you're going outside the data center, outside the region, whether it's 80 or less or it's S3, yeah, then there's a performance around just the time, the extra time it takes. So if you're in the same region, or the regions are close together, they're on fast internet, you're not going to notice much. If you're going across the world, you might notice more. But also, a lot of times when you're working with the data, you're working in a warm cache scenario. And the warm cache scenario, again, much higher in the stack. You're not going to feel these things. Direct Lake, once the model is loaded into memory, you're not going to feel these things at all. It may affect that cold cache scenario if you're going across the world on some of these. but it's not going to affect once that data is initially loaded. Every query after that's going to still be the same perf, whether it was in OneLake or shortcutted across the world. And again, same region, best practice, keep the data as close as possible. So shortcut it within the same regions, shortcut it within the same. If you're going across to S3, make sure they're co-located. You'll not notice anything. To help with some of the egress charges and help with some of that regional latency, we've also now introduced smart caching. So you can turn that on as an option. And then we will cache the data as you use it. So the next time you come back in, we don't have to egress it again, and it is sitting now co-located with the rest of the data in OneLake. And the one thing I love about the caching here is that, again, so low in the stack that you can have multiple users, multiple personas, multiple engines on top of it, not coordinating with each other, just using the same data. And because now we have all these different sources of usage, we can optimize the cache for all those different sources of usage without them having to collaborate on those optimizations.
Just like the as you mentioned, the ability for like this cloverleaf interchange highway to exchange information at an effective rate is, I think, is one of the really powerful parts of this, between the shortcuts, whether or not the data is in your central repository of OneLake or needing to be accessed from other systems. It reminds me of just like a similar thought of when Chris Webb blogged about the ability to query fold between databases. Where you actually could turn stuff. It's kind of like a hidden feature because it just doesn't. It's not turned on by default. But cross database folding, and like the massive performance increases you have of this. But this is just done like, but that at a larger scale and across many more systems.
Yeah, and like I said, the performance stuff. If you keep those best practices, you're probably never going to notice a difference there. And if there are reasons you can't, then yes, you have those caching options you can turn on that will help you out a lot.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a little goes a long way, and the further upstream you can put in these optimizations, the happier all the downstream artifacts will be, for sure.
For sure. Let me make one more point here too. So we just joined across two engines, and we still have that one row of data, but the one row of data now has a nice friendly customer name rather than a GUID. Let's go add another row. Let me flip back to that original data warehouse and finally just add another row. So a very simple update here, but if I was copying the data, I'd have to go run a pipeline. I'd have to run a pipeline to integrate those data changes as a consumer, because I'm copying. I have to maintain that copy. Here, there is no copy. I don't have to worry about being on a stale copy because there is no copy. So once that data is inserted, I go back as the consumer, I just refresh the query. It's here. It is truly one copy of data being combined with another single copy of data happened to be in another cloud. So we're all working off the same copies here. And as data changes, I don't have to do anything to get that. It just comes across because we're referencing it.
I think collectively, and also as we're starting to come towards the end of the time here, what's some takeaways that you would recommend for people based on what you've shown between shortcuts and everything else? Either things that they should explore. I know there's a couple of times like, how do I understand licensing? How do I understand some of the features? What would you recommend as some learning resources for people getting started or wanting to see how all of these features can best benefit their tenant, their organization?
Yeah, so there's lots of great videos out there. Lots of great sessions that have also been recorded and put on YouTube. There's obviously the Fabric learning material, and then just last week, I believe this released. Raghu, who's one of our legendary CTOs, him and I collaborated on a new white paper that really explains our vision for OneLake and for file formats and open storage systems in general. It's called Open Lakes, not Walled Gardens. And that is now available to read if you go to aka.ms/openlakes. So that's also give you a little bit more insight into our thinking and where we're going next here. But other than that, get out there and try the product if you haven't tried it yet. Push it to its limits, give us feedback. We'd love to take that and help shape the future as we move forward.
I dropped that link into that. I've not actually read that white paper yet, so it's now queued up as part of my Friday read this afternoon.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah, we were debating before whether it's a good time or not to post a blog on a Friday. This one got posted on a Friday, so
Of
we'll do
course.
some more marketing around it. But if you haven't seen it, please check it out. It's it's a really comprehensive uh, look into our vision. And Ragu's an amazing writer and teacher, and he really spells out some of these concepts in detail.
It's just one, and just also slightly plugging another Microsoft product. There's been a few times where I've give using Edge, you can ask Copilot to summarize something that you have, like, and give me key takeaways. So the if you can't read something in detail yet, I found it's been pretty accurate at being able to in like 30 seconds or less verbally describe to me the takeaways of something longer, like a white paper. You should read the whole thing, but I've enjoyed that part of it when I need to quickly just hear some key points of something.
I've been using it more for the read aloud. Has actually gotten really good and
Yeah,
natural.
exactly, and I'm also using, like, I have ChatGPT Pro, and like the Scarlett Johansson voice that's built into that one now. It is adamant that it is not Scarlett Johansson, but it sounds exactly like her from the movie Her.
It's getting very realistic.
Exactly. But Josh, no, this has been fantastic. I think we got a really good thorough walk through, both from kind of like the 35,000 foot level, but also we took the plane down to the 5,000 foot level a few times to also just understand a bit of the infrastructure. As we're wrapping up, just in case anybody has any remaining questions, drop it into the chat. At the moment, I don't see anything left, but some good active participation and a lot of kind of chat appreciation as we were going through this stuff. So it was very well received. One question that I do get from a lot of people, though, is usually, is the deck available? So is there a PDF version of this anywhere that could possibly be made for people to look over later? Or at least the slides that you showed?
No. I've made it available at some of the conferences. I don't think we have a place to actually download it from Microsoft at the moment. Let me see if I can find a place to actually put a PDF. Um, but yeah, I don't think
OneLake?
we ever had a place. We have the docs pages, obviously you can download those,
Yeah.
but I don't think we ever have a place where we post these publicly, other than at the conference sessions. But I can see if I can find one.
If you can find, I would see either if you can put it anywhere with just a link to download, feel free to do that.
I can give it to you as well if you want to post
I'll
it.
say, yeah, if you just want to hand that off, I stick it
Sure.
on the site, and then they can just download it from there. But either way, I'm sure somebody will appreciate getting a copy of that to download. There is one remaining question from Adam. So how does your boat fit into the OneLake strategy?
We were talking about this before the stream started. So Reed has a boat still. I don't have mine anymore.
Yep.
I was in a boat share, which makes it a little less sticky, I guess. But when COVID happened, I also had several young kids happen, and my wife didn't actually like boating, so it was a perfect storm of not having a boat anymore. But
Exactly.
I do miss that.
You need the one. You got to have the one boat, the one fishing rod, so then you can go one fishing.
Yes, and it's been a long time, or it's the first time I gotten through a whole session without a Lord of the Rings joke, unless they were happening on chat.
Oh, the One Ring. I've definitely had a few blog posts that have talked about, like, I think years ago when I did one on referencing queries as like data sources and stuff. It was like the one query to rule them all. It was, I think, the name of the article.
Yeah, there's a few OneLakes to rule them all blogs out there.
Yep. It's the exact community that I appreciate, is hardcore Lord of the Rings fans.
I gotta go watch it again.
Oh, I do. It's so I'll be in Europe, but just as an FYI, there is a Fathom events, and I believe it's going to be playing at Cinerama in Seattle. They
Yes.
are they're bringing the 4K movies back into theaters, so it's like the June 10th, 11th, and 12th or something like that. They will be playing each movie, but you can go see them in theater. But it's the new, like the one from like 4 years ago when he did the 4K remaster.
Yeah.
So you can get a chance to go see those in theaters if you want.
Nice. Well, yeah, I'll get an opportunity to catch up on the joke.
Exactly. But otherwise, I appreciate you taking time out of your Friday morning to come on
Thank you
for
for
this.
having me.
This has been fantastic. Yeah. And I certainly would love to have you back on at some point as this product continues to evolve. I'm sure there'll be opportunity to talk about some new and exciting things in the future.
Definitely. Yeah, happy to join you again. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. All right. And with that, you have a great rest of your Friday and weekend, and everyone else, enjoy those as well. Adam, enjoy your stream tomorrow morning. I'll still be asleep at 7 a.m. All right. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships or our merchandise store for cool swag. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on your social media platform of choice to help our channel grow. So, until next time.